Okay, good evening. We are sponsored tonight by my father, Mr. Loiterman, Lilo Nishmas, Mr. Loiterman's paternal grandmother, Mrs. Temaluka Loiterman, Tamar Leah Bas Yitzchak, whose yortzeit was on the 7th of Adar. May your neshama have an aliyah. And we are talking about more korbanos. Okay? We are at the Mishnah on the bottom of Mem Daladam and Beis. The Mishnah says, Haparim v'ha'elim v'ha'kvasim einan makvin zeseh. If you've got some bulls, you've got some rams, and you've got some sheep, all to be brought on the same day. Talking about korbanos tzibur, so we're talking about a community offering. The Gemara is going to talk about what circumstance this is. Like what is this obligation that you have all these animals to bring? So if I've got bulls, I've got rams, I've got sheep. So they're not dependent on each other. You can bring them one, however many you have. Let's say you don't have enough to bring for all of them. You can bring what you have. Rabbi Shimon says, Im hayu lahem parim merubim. If you have a choice, right, and they have enough money to buy all the cows that you need, all the bulls that you need. I keep saying cows, but all the bulls that you need.
Same family. So.
Same family, right? But one's the Mr., one's the Mrs. So velo hayu lahem nisachim, but you don't have enough money to buy all the wine that goes with them. Yavi par echad unisachav velo yakrivu kulam below nisachim. You should bring one bull together with everything that it needs, rather than bring multiple bulls and not have everything that it needs, right? This is paralleled in halacha, that we say that it's better to daven less with more kavanah than to daven more with less kavanah, right? So this is better to do less perfectly than to do more less perfectly. Okay, so says the Gemara. Hani parim ukvasim dehecha. Okay, Mishnah's talking about, I've got bulls, I've got rams, I got sheep. What is the circumstance? Where are we talking about? What korbanos are we dealing with? Ilema dechag. Well, let's start off. When is a day that we bring lots of korbanos? Sukkos. Sukkos has lots of korbanos. You've got bulls, you've got sheep, right? You've got rams, all of those. But there, the pasuk says, kamishpat and kamishpatam. By each of the days that we have to bring the korbanos, it uses the word that they have to be brought kamishpat, according to the law, and according to their laws, ksif behu, which means that you can't leave them out. So the halacha is incorrect. The Mishnah here says that these bulls and cows and sheep, bulls and sheep and rams are all not dependent on each other, but in reality they are. If it was talking about Sukkos, you've got to bring all of them or none of them by Sukkos. Ella, so rather derosh chodesh. Maybe we're talking about the bulls and the sheep of the korban musaf of Rosh Chodesh, and also we could be talking about vatzeres de chumash hapikudim, and we could be talking about shvuos offerings that are talked about in the chumash of Numbers. It's interesting,
Bamidbar.
Right? Bamidbar, which is interesting that it's called in the Gemara Numbers, right? Hapikudim, right? So we say that's the English.
You mean in the desert, right?
Right? Yes, Bamidbar. Well, that's what in English is called, right? In English they call it Numbers, right? Because why is it called Numbers? Because it starts off, the whole first section of Bamidbar is counting Bnei Yisrael. So it's called Numbers. So, right? Now, there's two places that korbanos of Yomim Tovim are mentioned. That's what's critical to know. Parshas Emor, which is in Sefer Vayikra, and in Parshas Pinchas in Sefer Bamidbar, right? The korbanos that are korban musaf offerings, those are in Parshas Pinchas. The offerings that are specific to the Yom Tov, those are in Parshas Emor. So they're presumed to not be the same ones, as we will see, right? They're not the same offerings. I've got, when it talks about for Shavuos, so then I'm going to have my special Shavuos offering of the shnei kivasim that goes with the two sheep that go together with the shtei alechem, the two loaves of bread. That's not in Pinchas. That's in Emor. Then when it gets to Pinchas, it tells me all about the musaf offerings that are brought. So I've got offerings that are brought for the day, and then I've got musaf offerings on top of it. So
like the afternoon or midday thing, right?
Well, they're brought before. Musaf is going to be brought after all these other korbanos. Okay, so now it says in Bamidbar, v'kravtim ola l'reach nichoach. You're going to bring an ola, parim, which are going to be bulls, b'nei vakar shnayim, two of them, ayel echad. He quotes the whole psukim here. He says also a one ram and shiva kvasim and 7 sheep. Okay, so therefore, doesn't say that there have to be all brought. If you bring one, you don't have to bring the others. So that's what we could be talking about, the Shavuos offerings in Bamidbar. Move on to Mem Hey Amud Aleph. Okay? Now, Elim Dehecha. The thing is that the Mishnah talks about rams. So where are the
rams or just rams?
Rams. So a dehanhu, if you're talking about the rams that are taking place on Rosh Chodesh and also the ones that are supposed to be brought on the Shavuos offerings that are in Bamidbar, the Rosh Chodesh offerings, Rosh Chodesh and the Musaf offerings of Shavuos. So it says Ayilhu. It's only one ram in those, right? And all of those you're supposed to bring 2 bulls, 7 sheep, 1 ram. So where are you talking about multiple rams in the Mishnah? And atzeres de Toras Kohanim. So, and if you're going to tell me we're going to talk about the rams that are brought by Emor, Parshas Emor, where it talks about the Shavuos offerings, there the pasuk is, we quote, V'yikravtim al alechem, you're going to bring together with the bread, Shivas Kivasim, 7 sheep, Tmimim, B'nei Shana, 1-year-old perfect sheep, Upar ben Bakar, 1 bull, Echad ve'elim shnayim, and 2 rams. You will Hashem minchasam v'niskehem ishel reach nichoach. So therefore, you see that there are 2 rams, but those are the rams that are not the musaf korban rams. Those are the rams that go together with the shtei alechem offering. So problem is havaya ksiv behu. The pasuk says yiyu, they shall be. Whenever we have the word yiyu, we know that you can't mess around with those. You need all of them. So therefore, the offerings that are listed in Parshas Emor are all required. It's all or nothing. The ones that are by Musaf in Pinchas may not be all or nothing, but the problem is we only have 1 ram. So we're kind of stuck. Can't be either one of those 2. So Liolam Datzeres de Toras Kohanim. No, we're going to say it's talking about the Shavuos offerings that are in Toras Kohanim. That's what we call Vayikra, Toras Kohanim, the laws of the Kohanim. V'hachi Kamer, this is what it means in the Mishnah. Lo elim de Toras Kohanim me'akvi le'ayel de chumash hapikudim. What it means is the rams that are in Parshas Emor, which are both required. You can't do one without the other, but you don't need the ram that is the musaf offering to do those, and you don't need those to do the musaf offering. The ram of the musaf is independent of the other 2 rams. That's what it's saying. So the 2 things are independent. Musaf and the other rams are not part of each other. That's what the psukim mean. Ella parim dafilo ahadadi lumakfe. So that means that the bulls, right, even in the korban musaf, so those are not going to stop one another from being brought, because it doesn't say in Parshas Pinchas that the bulls are yiyu. It doesn't say that they have to be. And ve'elim dehacha udehacha hu delo ma'akvi. And when we talk about, on the other hand, when we talk about the rams, it's the rams of the musaf are not connected to the other rams. So it seems like you've got, if you're going to look at it as you've got 2 groups, so then everything that's in this group is a group, and everything that's this group is a group. But then you're saying that the 2 that are in this group are also not required for each other. So how is this working? So the answer is, Tana mili mili katani. The Tana is talking about each individual thing separately. Meaning it's true, that's exactly how it goes. The bulls of Musaf are not required for each other. You can bring 1 bull, not the other bull. Also in Musaf. The reason
why I can't bring...
Because it doesn't say the word yiyu, right? It doesn't say they have to be. So, but the rams that are by Shavuos, that are listed in Parshas Emor, must be brought together. But they don't have to be brought together with the other ram. And even though that sounds like you're talking about 2 different sets of rules, that's okay. The Mishnah groups the whole concept together. If these are sometimes not required for these, sometimes their rams are not required for other rams, sometimes their bulls are not required for other bulls, but sometimes the rams are required for each other, and that doesn't bother the Tana of the Mishnah to be precise in that way. Okay, now, in Sefer Yechezkel, we've got some very difficult psukim. Now I'm going to spend some time trying to explain some difficult psukim in Sefer Yechezkel.
We have the drawing board here just in case.
We won't have to draw pictures of Sefer Yechezkel. But you'll see that the psukim seem to contradict what the Torah says. It says in Yechezkel, Ubiyoma Chodesh, it says like on Rosh Chodesh, you're supposed to take Par ben Bakar Tamim, you're supposed to take 1 bull, Veshisha Kivasim, 6 sheep, Ve'ayel Tmimimu, and 1 ram. So now, Par Matam Lomar. What does it tell me about the bull, right? That you're supposed to bring. There's no bull that you're supposed to bring. There's not 1 bull that you're supposed to bring on what do you call it, in Rosh Chodesh. The Torah says you're supposed to bring bulls, multiple. So why is Yechezkel saying you only bring one bull? And in the Torah, it says you're supposed to bring two. Lefish Nemar B'Torah, the answer is because it says in the Torah, parim, you're supposed to bring two. Minayinchim lo matzah shnayim mevi echad. So it's telling me this law. What if I don't have to? Can I bring one? Talmud lomar par. Therefore, Sefer Yechezkel says you can even bring one. Okay, the Torah tells me bring two, you bring one, you're also okay. That's what Yechezkel says. Okay, next says umashin shisha kvasim. What about the fact that it says 6 sheep? Matam lomer. That's not true. In Pinchas it says you're supposed to bring 7 sheep. So why is Yechezkel say you're only bringing 6? Lefishikosav b'Torah shiva. Since it says in the Torah you're supposed to bring 7. Uminayinchim lo matzah shiva yavi shisha. How do I know that if I can't bring all 7, I can bring 6? Talmud lomar shisha. That's why Yechezkel says you can get away with 6. The Yechezkel is teaching us this rule that's in the Mishnah that if you don't have all of them, you can bring less. Now, in Minayinchim lo matzah shisha yavi chamisha. How do I know that if I don't have 6, I can bring 5? Yechezkel says I need to bring 6. So maybe 6 is my minimum. Like if I don't have 6, then too bad. So chamisha yavi arba. If I don't have 5, I can bring 4. Arba yavi shalosha. If I don't have 4, I can bring 3. Shlosha yavi shnaim. If I've got 3, I can bring 2. Va'afilu echad. Even if I've only can bring 1. Talmud lomar pasuk says in Yechezkel v'lakvasim kasher tasig yado. When it comes to the sheep, you bring however many you can, right? Whatever you're able to afford. Now that it says you can bring whatever you can afford, shisha kvasim lamali. Why do you have to tell me about 6? Right? Obviously, I can bring 6. I can bring 1. I can obviously bring 6. So the answer is dekamadav lahadure mahadrinon. The answer is because you might think, well, bring whatever you can. I want to bring 1. No, that's not what you're supposed to do. You bring the most you can. Right? You can't bring 7. Bring 6. Okay, I can't afford that. Then you could start lowering it down. But bring the maximum that you can. That's why Yechezkel says bring 6. But then he says also you can bring less if the Beis Hamikdash has no funds. How do I know that if Rosh Chodesh you have 2 bulls or the 7 sheep that you can't bring only part of them, you can only bring one of them, but not you have to bring all of them? Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says yihiyu, they must be, right? Right, this is talking about in Torah's Kohanim. That's the pasukim about the korbanos you're supposed to bring on Rosh Chodesh that are in Vayikra, not the ones, as we said, the ones that are in Bamidbar. You bring the best you can. The Musaf you can bring the best you can. But the korbanos that are in Parshas Emor about Rosh Chodesh, those are different korbanos. You all or nothing, right? All for one and one for all. You got to bring them all. Okay, pasuk in Yechezkel says, difficult pasuk to explain. Next, Ko Amar Hashem Elokim. This is what Hashem says. Barishon be'echad lechodesh, on the first day in the first month, right? On the first month, tikach par ben bakar tamim. You're going to take a bull, a perfect bull, v'chatos, and a sin offering, es ha mikdash, as holy offerings. Now, sorry, it doesn't say v'chatos. It says v'chitesa. I didn't read that right. V'chitesa es ha mikdash. You will purify. V'chitesa means you will purify. Right, it's for the chatos, right? That you're going to purify from Avera. V'chiteisas hamikdash. So you're going to take one bull and you're going to purify the mikdash. So what do you mean? The bull, chatos olahi. The bull is not a chatos, right? The bull is an olah in the Torah. The Torah tells you you're supposed to bring it as an olah. Why does it say v'chiteisa? You're supposed to purify it. So I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan answers, Parsha zu Eliyahu asid l'dorsha. He says, I don't know. Can't explain that one. Eliyahu Hanavi, we got to get Eliyahu Hanavi here. He's got to explain it, right? Mefarshim start to ask.
He's occupied right now.
Mefarshim ask, if you're waiting till Mashiach comes, why don't you just ask Yechezkel? Why you ask Eliyahu Hanavi? The answer is because Eliyahu Hanavi didn't die necessarily, right? Eliyahu Hanavi, you might meet him in a base medrash one day and ask him, right? Because they met him a few times in Shas.
Get the chance sooner,
right? You might be able to get the chance sooner, right? So we have to. Don't know how to explain the pasuk. As Rabbi Yochanan says. Ravashi says, yeah, but he tries. He has an answer. Miluim hikrivu b'mei Ezra. He's saying that Yechezkel is not talking about the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh here. He's talking about the rededication and sanctification of the second Beis Hamikdash. Machlokas, Rashi says the second Beis Hamikdash. The issue is that Yechezkel is prophesying most of his sefer about the third Beis Hamikdash. So Machlokas Rishonim about which we're talking about here. But there's going to be a rededication, re-sanctification. Either we're talking about the rededication, re-sanctification that Ezra did in the second Beis Hamikdash, or the one that's eventually being done by the third Beis Hamikdash. Which they're going to sanctify. So this is a bull which was brought as an olah. And during the Yemei Miluim, during the days of sanctification of the Mishkan, they did in fact bring a bull as an olah. So that was, and it was during the 8th day of the Yemei Miluim, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, they brought an Egel ben Bakar lechatos, right? So therefore, that's what they, also in Ezra, they brought a bull, ben Bakar, as a chatos. Okay. Tanya Nami Achiv, a brisa that supports that explanation that we're talking about different korbanos. Rabbi Yehuda says, Parsha Zu, this Parsha that's in your Chezkel, Eliyahu Osid Lidorsha. There's no way we're going to be able to understand this, right? We need Eliyahu Hanavi to explain it. Amar lo Rabbi Yossi explains, Miluim hikrivu b'mei. This is the extra offerings that were brought when they rededicated the second Beis Hamikdash. These are not your regular Rosh Chodesh offerings that are going on here. This was the rededication ceremony of the second Beis Hamikdash. They brought a special bull offering that was a chatas kedar shikrivu b'Moshe, just like they did during Moshe's time when they sanctified the Mishkan. Amarlo datach Amarlo tanuach datach chanach dati. You should have mindful peace. Your mind should be at peace, just as you put my mind at peace. Thank you. I didn't understand how to say it. Now you explained it to me. Okay, good. We're not done with Sefer Yechezkel. Yechezkel's got a lot of confusing psukim. Pasuk says.
Can I ask you, what's the context in this of Yechezkel that he's talking about?
All the korbanos and things? It's a good question. I didn't look up what Yechezkel's doing over here. He has nevuos, I guess, about various korbanos that are being brought. I don't know why. I don't remember why. So he says, "V'chol nevela utreifa mina ofa mina behema lo yochlu kohanim." Yechezkel says, an animal that was not slaughtered through shechita properly, that's nevela, or an animal that's treifa, that's from birds or from animals, kohanim shouldn't eat it. Well, Kohanim who delo yochlu ha-Yisrael achi. What does that mean? Yechezkel, what's he talking about? Only Kohanim can eat non-kosher meat? No Jews can eat non-kosher meat. Why is Yechezkel saying only Kohanim can't? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Parsha Zu Eliyahu Asi Lidorsha. Rabbi Yochanan gives up again, right? Can't understand what Yechezkel's talking about. We'll wait till Eliyahu Hanavi comes and he'll explain what Yechezkel's talking. Yechezkel's difficult sefer. Ravina says no, because Kohanim itzrichalei. I know already, not a regular Jewish person, of course he can't eat a nevela that's not slaughtered properly, of course. But I might have had a havamina that a Kohen could. Why? Because I might have thought to have said, Kohanim can eat a bird that has been killed with malika, with the fingernail, which a regular Jewish person cannot eat. That is right?
Proper shechita.
It's not proper shechita, but by a chatas ha'of, a bird offering that is slaughtered that way, you can slaughter it with the thumbnail that way. So tishtari nami nevelu treifa, you might think that Kohanim, they're just permitted to eat things that are not slaughtered properly. So therefore, kamash malon, Yechezkel saying, even the Kohanim can't eat it. Okay, so that's the point there. Okay, now, in Parshas Vayikra, it says that if Beis Din makes a mistake, right? We have learned this in Maseches Horios, that if Beis Din makes an error, and as a result of their error, the Shvatim follow what they say, and they sin. Then, as majority, once the majority of the tribes, once the majority of the Shvatim do the Avera, so then the Beis Din brings a korban parha elam davar, a bull in the Beis Hamikdash.
And do they find a new judge for the Beis Din if that happens?
No, you don't have to replace. They have to say they're sorry, right? They have to do their kapara. So it says in Yechezkel. Let's understand this pasuk in Yechezkel in that light. V'chein ta'aseh b'shiva b'chodesh. So you should do on the 7th of the month. Meish shogeh umipesi v'kipartim asabayis. The pasuk says you should do this. You should also make a bull as a sin offering that we were talking about before on the 7th of the month for a person who acts in a state of foolishness, and you will create an atonement on the house. So Shiva. So what is the 7 here? Right, Bashiva v'chein taseh b'shiva, that you're supposed to do the 7. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Elu Shiva Shvatim Shechatu. The 7 here is not talking about days of the month. It's talking about the 7 tribes that are required to follow the advice of Beis Din in order for Beis Din to bring this korban. The Ava Pi She'ein Ruba Shel Kahal. Even if, as we said, that's not the majority of the community, right? If you've got, let's say, the other 5 Shvatim have many more people than the 7 Shvatim that did it. Once you've got 7 Shvatim that do it, still you bring the korban. Okay, so now, Chodesh, how you can explain the word Chodesh, the month, right? I understand the number 7, that's great, but it sounded like it was the 7th of the month if you read and translate the pasuk. But it's not, it's the 7 Shvatim. So what's the Chodesh? Im Chidshu, it means that if they make a new rule, the Amru, when they say Chaylev Mutter, they say that something which is prohibited, like forbidden fats, is permitted to eat. So that's the case of the Par Helam Davar.
You read it like B'chein Taseh, V'shiva Chadash.
Kinda, yeah. Even it says Bachodesh, right? Bachodesh. But the 7 that follow the new ruling, right? That's how they're reading the pasuk in Yechezkel. Isn't it interesting how you read the pasuk in Yechezkel? He writes very cryptically, and it's easy to misunderstand what he says. So then, Rabbi Yochanan explains the pasuk. Meish shoget umipesi. It says from a person who commits the act of negligence or foolishness. Melamed shein chayavin ela al helam davar. Means that the Beis Din has to teach the halacha and make a mistake, right? Im shigas ma'isa, together with the fact that the people act based on that mistake, right? You need the 2 steps, as we said in Maseches Horios. You can't just have people doing it wrong. Beis Din has to rule, and then people have to do it, and then Beis Din brings the korban. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav, Zachor oso ha'ish latov. We should remember this man for good. V'chanina ben Chizkiah. His name is Chanina ben Chizkiah. Why? She'el malihu. If it wasn't for him, Nigna Sefer Yechezkel, we would have given up on Sefer Yechezkel, and it wouldn't be in Tanakh. They would have put Sefer. Too many things in the Sefer Yechezkel are very difficult to understand. We wouldn't have put it in. Shahayu Devar Sos or L'Divrei Torah. There's so many things that are there that contradict what's written in the Torah. We would have thought it's no good. Ma'asa. So what did he do? Ha'ala shlosh mios garvei shemen. He got himself 300 barrels of oil. V'yoshev ba'aliyah, and he went up to his attic, locked the door, drosho, and he figured it out. He just sat there and he worked on Yechezkel over and over and over until he figured out what all the psukim mean. And then once people understood what Yechezkel meant, okay, now we can include it because it wasn't contradictory. Amar Rabbi Shimon says, Im hayu lahem parim merubin. Okay, now the Mishnah says, Rabbi Shimon says that if he has lots of bowls and you don't have the wine that goes with it, so then better to bring less bowls and the wine that goes with it. Okay, so that's what he says. Tana Rabbanan, a rabbi's learning in Brisa. The Ephah, it says in Yechezkel, back to Yechezkel, but he's talking about the korbanos of Rosh Chodesh. The Ephah lapar, you bring an ephah of flour for a bowl. The ephah la'ayil, and you bring an ephah for a ram. Ya'aseh mincha, that's going to be the mincha v'lakvasim for the sheep. Kasher tasig yado, whatever you're able to get, as we said, v'shemen hin, and oil of a hin la'ephah for the ephah. So the problem is, Rabbi Shimon says, how are you going to understand this pasuk? V'chimidas parim elim achasi, if you look in the Torah, the amount of flour that you bring for a bowl is 3 times the amount that you bring, or right, 3 times the amount that you bring for an ayil, right? It's shosha esronim, and by an ayil, sorry, it's only 3 to 2, and it's 2 esronim by a ram. So it's 2 esronim for a flour by a ram, and 3 for a bull. Why is Yechezkel saying it's the same amount? Ella. So this is what you have to explain what's going on in this pasuk. Shim hayu lehem par merubin. If you've got lots of bulls, okay, so v'lo hayu nisachim, teach me, I've got lots of bulls and I don't have enough wine and everything that I need for all of them. Yaviu par echad unisachav, bring one bull, and bring the wine that goes with it. Val yikruvu kulon below nisachim, rather than to bring all the bulls together with everything. Vim hayu lahem elim merubin, if you've got lots of rams, okay, v'lo hayalahan efasan, and you don't have enough of the flour that you need for their offering, for their mincha, yaviu ayalechad ve'efaso, just bring one together with its ephah, v'lo yikruvu kulam below ephos, and don't bring all of them together without bringing the ephah. Better to bring one with everything than all. That's what the pasuk in Yechezkel is talking about. Okay, now we go on to the next Mishnah. Hapar ha'elim ve'akvasim. We're talking about the shtei halechem. We're back to this korban that was brought on Shavuos that had 2 loaves of bread. And you bring 2 kvasim, 2 sheep that come together with those loaves of bread. So if I have the bull and I have rams and the 7 sheep, v'hasair, and the goat that comes as a chatos, that all come as part of the korbanos that we bring on Shavuos, ein makvin es halechem. Those offerings, they don't, if I don't have those, I can still bring the bread. V'lo halechem ma'akvan, and the bread has nothing to do with those korbanos, right? There's lots of korbanos on Shavuos. You're going to bring all of those, but you don't need to worry about the bread just because you don't have those korbanos. You can still bring the bread. Halechem ma'akev shne es hakivosim. However, the two sheep that go together with the bread, that's essentially part of the same offering. Therefore, if I have the bread, right? If I don't have the bread, I can't bring those two sheep. Ve'en hakvasim makvin es halechem. However, the bread is the most important part. So the sheep, if I don't have sheep, I can still bring the bread. Div Rabbi Akiva, that's what Rabbi Akiva holds.
If you don't have the bread, you can still bring the sheep?
The other way around. If I don't have the sheep, I can bring the bread. According to Rabbi Akiva, but if I don't have the bread, I can't bring the sheep. That's what Rabbi Akiva says. Rabbi Shimon's going to say the other way. Rabbi Shimon ben Nanos says, he says the other way. Lochi, that's not correct. Ella hakivasim makvinas halechem. The sheep are the bigger deal. The sheep are more required. So if I don't have the sheep, I can't bring the bread. But if I don't have the bread, I can still bring the sheep.
That was a question, right?
Right. So it's machlokas. The machlokas Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon ben Nanos. Why? We see that that's how it was when the Jewish people were in the Midbar for 40 years. Karvu kivasim below lechem. They brought the sheep on Shavuos, but they didn't bring any bread. Right? Why? They didn't have any bread. They brought mun. They had mun. So no bread. So I don't know what they did with the lechem apanim, right? Somehow they were still able to do lechem apanim, right?
Your wife.
So this has anything to do with the end of the Omer period?
I know why. Sorry?
This has anything to do with...
This is the end of the Omer period, that's correct.
So they had to bring the bread.
So they had to bring the bread. That's the most important part of the korban. But they didn't have it. So therefore he says, nevertheless, even though they didn't have it, they still brought the sheep, right? Yeah. That's how it worked. Now, the reason why it's important, the reason why they couldn't bring the bread is because when it comes to the korban of Shavuos, the wheat has to be wheat that grew in Eretz Yisrael. That's why. And since they were outside of it, they were in the desert, they didn't have wheat grown in Eretz Yisrael, so they couldn't.
If it was Chutz La'aretz, then it wasn't kosher.
Correct, you can't bring it from Chutz La'aretz. Afkan, so too, now, after the fact, back when they got to Eretz Yisrael, Yikaru kvasim below lechem, I can bring the sheep without the bread. Remember Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, halacha kedivrei ben nanos. The halacha is like ben nanos. The sheep are the most important thing. Even without the bread, you can do it. Avalena tam kedrav. The only thing is, it's not for the reason he said. Right? He said you see it from the desert about how they brought it in the desert. That's not the reason. Shekol ha'omer bechumash ha'pikudim. Anything that's written in Bamidbar, all of the korbanos that are korban musaf that are in Parshas Pinchas, karav Bamidbar, those were brought in the desert. Right? So they brought in Pinchas. Right? They were told about all the korbanos all the korbanos musaf. However, v'chomer b'Torah's kohanim, all the korbanos that are listed in Vayikra and Parshas Emor, right? All of these sheep and rams that we're talking about now, ain't karvim. Those were not brought in the desert, right? So umishabo la'aretz karvov elu ve'elu. So they started to bring both of them only when they got to Eretz Yisrael. In the desert, they didn't bring these korbanos. So therefore, what's his proof? His proof was, how did they bring the sheep in the desert when they didn't have bread? The answer is they didn't. So he's right lahalacha, but he's wrong in his logic. Ma'ani Omer yikru kvasim below lechem. So then I have to explain, why do I agree with Ben Nanas as far as the fact that I can bring bread? Mibnei shakvasim matiranes atzman below lechem below kvasim she'ein lo mi yatzirenu. The answer is because the sheep, they have a whole korban process. So the throwing of the blood of the sheep is going to permit the consumption of the meat of the sheep. The bread, how does it become acceptable to eat when you throw the blood of the korban? Well, if you don't have the sheep, so then you're never going to be the loaves are never going to be acceptable. So therefore, if you can't bring the bread without the sheep, so there's no way to permit the bread. That's why the bread is the secondary thing. Okay, Tana Rabbana. Let's see the Gemara. I explained it. Pasuk says about the section in Vayikra in Parshas Emor Paragraph Gimel, v'ikravdem alallechem. When you're supposed to bring the following korbanos on the bread, you're going to bring 7 shivas kvasim. You're going to bring 7 sheep, right? And so it says from the pasuk that chova alallechem, the 7 sheep that are in the pasuk there, are required, right? The bread and them are linked. Why did you say that only 2 of the sheep are? So, right? So the answer is shivas. So as the pasuk says, Shivas kivasim tamimim. You're going to bring on the bread 7 sheep. It doesn't say v'kravtem shivas kivasim tamimim al alechem. It doesn't say you should bring the sheep with the bread. It just says with the bread, you're also going to bring another korban, also 7 sheep. Afapi she'ein alechem, which means that even if you don't have the bread, you're going to bring the sheep as well. By putting it in that order. Im kain, if that's true, matama lomar alechem, then why does it talk about the bread in the pasuk? Don't even mention the bread. It's not relevant. So Melamed shelo nischayvu bakvasim kodem shenischayvu balechem. The answer is that when they were in the desert, right, they weren't supposed to. They weren't going to bring the shtei alechem because they didn't have grain from Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, they also didn't have to bring these other korbanos that are in Sefer Vayikra, the 7 sheep. They didn't bring them either. That's what Rabbi Shimon said in the Mishnah. So that's how you know that. Divrei Rabbi Tarfon. That's what Rabbi Tarfon says. Rabbi Kiva says, Yochol hein kivasim ha'murim kan. He says it could be that those 7 sheep that are written by Shavuos, that are in the parsha of the Shtei Alechem, which is in Vayikra, are the same ones, are kivasim ha'murim b'chumash v'ikudim. There's also in Sefer the Midbar, when it talks about Pinchas, and the Musaf for Shavuos also says that you're supposed to bring sheep. So maybe it's the same sheep. And so I am bringing them. I don't need to bring it with the bread. So Amarta, so you said Kishata Magia, Eitzel Parim, Ve'elim, when you get to the Shavuos, when it says by the bulls and the rams, Ein on Hain, those are not the same korbanos. Right? If you're talking about, you want to say the 7 sheep are the same as the other 7 sheep. Can't be. Because when you look at the bulls and the rams, the numbers don't line up. In Bamidbar, right, you're supposed to bring 2 bulls and 1 ram. And in Vayikra, it says you're supposed to bring 1 bull and 2 rams. So you see, they don't line up. So therefore, the 7 sheep that are in both parshas are not the same 7 sheep. Ella halalu bain biglal atzman v'halalu bain biglal lechem. The ones that are in Bamidbar, they come by themselves, and the ones that are in Vayikra are coming only when you bring the bread. So that's the connection. Nimtza ma she'omer b'chumash ha'pekudim karav Bamidbar. So it's going to come out that the Musaf offerings that are listed in Parshas Pinchas, they did do those in the desert. But all the offerings that are in Parshas Emor, they didn't do those in the desert. Lo karav Bamidbar. Okay, now, question is, okay, let's ask Rabbi Akiva a question. I understand that you're pointing out that the number of rams and the number of bulls is different. However, the number of sheep is the same. Fine, I'll give you the fact that the rams can't be the same as the other rams, and the bulls can't be the same as the bulls, because the numbers are different. Maybe the sheep, though, are the same. Who says it's not the same? It's 7 sheep. Right? The answer is no. Once you know you're changing the numbers by the rams and the bulls, you know the sheep that you're also talking about are part of a whole different group of korbanos. So it's not the same sheep. Okay. So your whole logic is based on the fact that the rams and the bulls are different. Who says it's different rams and bulls? Maybe this is what the Torah means to say by writing it in different ways. You've got a choice. Flip a coin. Which way do you want to do it? If you want to bring a bull and 2 rams, go ahead. If you want to bring 2 bulls and 1 ram, do that. You have a choice. You can either listen to what the Psukim say in Vayikra, or you can listen to what the Psukim say in Bamidbar. So the answer is Midishtani Sidron. He says, yeah, but the order is even listed wrong, because in Vayikra it says the 7 sheep. And then it says the bull, and then it says 2 rams. In Bamidbar, it says the bulls first, then it says the 1 ram, and then the 7 sheep. The whole order is all different. Everything is different. Shma mina achrini nihu. It's a completely different set of korbanos, right? So if you're read through these parshas all the time, and it talks about bring this korban, always assume that the korbanos in Pinchas and the korbanos that are in Emor are the same. They're totally different korbanos. Each had their own separate rules for things. Now, Mishnah says, Halechem me'akev es hakvasim. This is now this argument between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas. Which is the most important part, the bread or the sheep? Right? If I don't have the bread, can I still do the sheep? If I don't have the sheep, can I still do the bread?
I would say the animal, the meat. Because the meat.
So you like Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas, right? Rabbi Akiva says the bread, that's the most important part of the korban. So
if you can't afford the bread,
Says Rabbi Akiva, right? Halechem ma'akev es hakvasim. The bread is the most important part. Can't bring the sheep. And Rabbi Shimon Nahna says the other way. My time in the Rabbi Akiva. Why does Rabbi Akiva say his way? Yehuda does not like it. So why does he say it? So the pasuk says the whole pasuk. I'll read the whole pasuk that he quotes. He brings it down here in the notes. Ve'inif ha'kohen osam al halechem habikurim. The kohen is going to wave them on the bread of the first offering that's being brought, the first bread from the new crop to new fall. Lifnei Hashem is going to be waved before Hashem al shnei kivasim on the two sheep, which we had said, Kodesh Yiyu Hashem la Kohen. It's going to be holy to Hashem, to the Kohen. So it says Yiyu. It says over there. Whenever it says Yiyu, it means that you need all of these items, right? So therefore, Yiyu is talking about the bread, right? It's talking about the bread. The bread is required. So Gamar, so he learns Gzer Shava. Yiyu mitihiyena, right? He says the word Yiyu gets compared to tiyena because the same shorish, haya, yiyeh, right? So therefore, by the bread which is waved, the shtei lechem, right? They shall be. Ma laholon lechem, just like the parsha that's written when it's talking about the beginning of the parsha. So it's the bread is talking. It says tiyena, it's talking about the bread. Afkan lechem. Even though here, when it says yiyu, it could be talking about the sheep. It could be talking about everything. No, yiyu is talking about the bread. Why? Because the word yiyu is exer shava to the word tiyena, and so therefore, whenever it says yiyu tiyena, it's talking about the bread. So as Rabbi Akiva says, the bread is the most important part. Ben Nanas says no. Gemar yiyu. We're going to learn a different Gzer Shava. The Gzer Shava is yiyu and yiyu from the 7 sheep that come together with the 2 loaves of bread. That's 7 sheep. It says those are supposed to be shivas. It says shivas kvasim tmimim b'reisho par bebakar echad ve'ilim shnayim yiyu ola Hashem. That has to be malahalon by the sheep of the ola. The 7 sheep, right? The 2 sheep are shlomim. Thank you. The 7 sheep are an ola. Those 7 sheep, it says yiyu, they're all together. Kvasim afkan. So here also it's talking about yiyu. The 2 sheep that are brought as a shlomim are yiyu. So therefore, they are required. So therefore, we're not talking about the bread, we're talking about the sheep. So it's really basically an argument about whether the word yiyu refers to the sheep or whether the word yiyu refers to the bread. And how do you know whether it refers to the sheep or the bread? It depends on where you learn your Gzer Shava to. Do you learn it from the word tihiyena, like Rabbi Akiva, when tihiyena is talking about bread? Or is he working off the word yiyu, which is talking about the other 7 ola sheep, and therefore it's talking about the sheep? Okay, so the question is, Ben Nanas nami nelef mi tihiyena. Why doesn't Ben Nanas like Rabbi Akiva's Gzer Shava and learn it from the word tihiyena? The answer is mala halan lechem afkan lechem, and then he would come to the conclusion that it's talking about bread. So the answer is donon yiyu mi yu vein donon yiyu mi tiyena. Why would he say yiyu? That's not how Gzer Shava works. Gzer Shava has to be the same word. Yiyu is the same word as yiyu, so it should be compared to the sheep, not tihiyena, which is comparing it to the bread. So my nafkamina, what difference does it make? So it says yiyu and tiyena, but we have a famous a brisa from Tana Debei Rabbi Yishmael, from the Yeshiva Rabbi Yishmael, where they tell you that actually the rules of Gzer Shava are pretty broad, right? V'shava kohen ubaha kohen. When a kohen comes after a week in order to see the tzaras, to revisit a house, so it says that he comes back the second week, he comes back, it says, when it comes the first week, he says shav, then he comes back the second week, he says uba, zehu shiva, zehu bia, tells us the rules of the 2 circumstances are the same. Why? Gzer shava, the Kohen returns and the Kohen comes. That's not even the same word, right? But the same idea, the Kohen is returning, so therefore, it's the same rules. So, what do you see? You see, you don't need the words to be exactly the same in order to make a Gzer shava. So he says, honey mili, yeah, that might be true. You may be able to do a Gzer Shava when the words are not the same, but heicha deleka dedamile, that's only if you have no other choice. There's no words that are like it. Ella of a heicha deika dedamile, but here, I've got 2 choices. I can compare yiyu to yiyu, or I can compare yiyu to tiyena. Why would I pick tiyena? It's not the same word. I will pick yiyu. So therefore, mi dedamile yofinon, I'm going to use the word that's closer to it. Okay. That's how Ben Nanas learns. Rabbi Akiva nami leilef yiyu mi yiyu. So what's Rabbi Akiva? What's going on with Rabbi Akiva? Why doesn't he learn yiyu from yiyu? Don and davar shematana lekohen mi davar shematana lekohen. Because I take a look at the items. The kvasim, the 7 sheep, those are olos. They're burned. They don't go to the kohen. The sheep and the bread are both consumed and eaten by the shlamim, and the bread are both eaten by the kohen. So it's better to compare the sheep to the bread because they're both consumed by the kohen. Lafukehani, which is not the same thing by the other 7 sheep, to olos ninu. Those are olos. Or if you want, I'll say, I can also, that maybe that's not what Menachos and Rabbi Akiva are arguing about. That was one answer, is Menachos and Rabbi Akiva are arguing over the Gzir Shava. Maybe they're arguing about the pasuk itself, because the pasuk says, Kodesh yiyu Hashem lakohen, they shall be holy to Hashem, to the Kohen. Rabbi Akiva Savar, this is talking about Ezehu davar shekulo lekohen. What are we talking about? This is the pasuk that says yiyu. So it should be kodesh yiyu. It shall be kodesh because it goes to Hashem, to the kohen. Well, what goes to the kohen? The sheep, the bread. The answer is must be talking about what goes to the kohen. What's the thing that goes to the kohen? Havyomer zeh lechem, the bread. The bread gets consumed by the kohen, right? Not the other sheep. The other sheep, part of it goes to the kohen. That's true, but the other part of it gets burned on the mizbeach. The bread goes to the kohen. It's talking about the bread. Menachos is miksiv kodesh yiyu lakohen. Doesn't say that it's holy, it goes to the kohen. It says kodesh yiyu Hashem lakohen. That's exactly the point. It's kodesh to Hashem, to the kohen. Ve'ezu davar shemiktasu Hashem miktasu lakohen. It has to be something that part of it goes to Hashem, part of it goes to the kohen. Elu kvasim, that's the sheep. Rabbi Akiva says miksiv kodesh yiyu Hashem v'lakohen. It doesn't say it's holy, it goes to Hashem and the kohen. It says Hashem lakohen. It's to Hashem through the kohen. Rav Huna, like Rav Huna says, Rav Huna, Keno Hashem Unasano La Kohen. When it talks about Korban Asham, right? It says Hamushav La Hashem La Kohen. He explains the pasuk means La Hashem La Kohen means the way to give it to Hashem is to give it to the Kohen. So therefore, it really means the bread, which is completely given to the Kohen. So therefore, you see that it's subject to some dispute as to exactly how to read the pasuk. Okay, next, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says Hakol Modim. So Rabbi Yochanan says that whether you're Rabbi Akiva or Menachos, everyone agrees she'im huzku zeh lo zeh shema'akvein zeh es zeh. That once the bread got connected to the sheep, there's a point in the offering, right? At the beginning, before the sheep, if all I had was bread or all I had was sheep, that's their argument. Once the offering begins, and the sheep and the bread become connected and part of one offering together, then if I lose one, I can't do the other one. Then it's for sure, then they're connected, right? Ve'ezehu zika shalan. How do they get connected? Shchita. I've got bread, I've got sheep. As soon as I do the slaughtering of the sheep, now the bread is connected to the sheep. If I lose the bread, now the sheep are no good, right? Everyone agrees to that, right? If I lose the sheep, the bread's no good. Everyone agrees after that point. Amar Ula. So Ula says, Bo me'amar Rava. So they asked a question in Eretz Yisrael. Tnufa osazika o ein osazika. What about the waving? Part of this offering of the sheep is that you take parts of the animal, right, and you're going to wave it together with the bread. And so, what if you lose a part of it after the waving? So does that are they connected or not? So Pashat le mid Rabbi Yochanan. Well, why? I mean, look what Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan said, Shchita osazika. Once they do shchita, they're already connected. Mikal the tnufa, eino osazika. It's not the tnufa, it's not the weight, it's not the waving. Now, there's 2 wavings, right? The waving that's done is first waving is when the animal's alive. They wave the animal, they pick it up and they wave it. Second time they wave is after they've slaughtered it and they have parts of the meat. Obviously, after it's dead already, the shechita already connected it, so that's not the issue. We're questioning whether the waving that comes before the shechita, whether that also connects it. Well, you see, look what Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan said the shechita connects it, not the waving, because they already did the waving and it's not connected. So therefore, it's not the waving; it's the shechita. Rabbi Yochanan gufa kami boile. Rabbi Yochanan had the question, right? So the answer is no. That's not what's going on. Rabbi Yochanan wasn't sure of the answer. Mifsha pshita le Rabbi Yochanan. What was Rabbi Yochanan? What was the issue, right? Rabbi Yochanan, did he know for sure? The shchita osazika utnufa ena osazika. Was he saying that the shchita, slaughtering it, connects the bread to the animal, not the waving? Or maybe what he was saying is shchita pshita le. Obviously, the shchita connects. Utnufa misafkali, but he wasn't sure what happens if you wave it. Wasn't sure if it's connected at that point. So teku. So they don't have an answer to that doubtful question. So they don't know the answer. Amalei Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina Rav Huna braid Rav Yeshua. So Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina says to Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, V'ha kiksiv. When the pasuk says that the Kohen is going to wave them the bread, and he's going to wave the animals with the sheep, it says Kodesh Yiyu LaHashem LaKohen. It's going to be holy to us. They shall be to Hashem, to the Kohen. So that pasuk is saying Basar Tnufiksiv. The pasuk says Yiyu, that they become required. That's after the waving, right? So Upligi Ben Nonos Rabbi Akiva. You see that Ben Nonos and Rabbi Akiva are still arguing over whether the bread is required or not. They're arguing, remember, they're arguing over the word Yiyu. Is the bread required? Is the bread not? Is the sheep required? Which is the main thing? But that pasuk occurs after the waving already took place. That means that you said that Rabbi Akiva and Ben Nonos agree that once the offering is connected, for sure they're both required for each other. But we see that they're still arguing. So, yeah.
You're talking about the first waving?
The first waving, yeah. So the first waving occurs, and nevertheless, you see Rabbi Akiva and Ben Nonos are arguing, right? So therefore, tenufa, the waving, can't make the connection, because otherwise, once there was a connection, right, it should answer our question. The waving can't make a connection, because otherwise, how can Ben Nonos and Rabbi Akiva be arguing? Well, the answer is utameich, according to your reasoning, basar tenufa v'lo basar shchita. Look at the offer. Look at the pasuk. The pasuk says that they bring the korban, and they're waving it before this pasuk of Yiyu, they should be holy, takes place after the shechita also. Ella mayislach lamimra. How are you going to explain what's going on here? Me karakai. We're saying that they shall be holy as before anything happens, right? One of these two things is required. Either the sheep are required or the bread. Before you make any sort. But umay kodash Yiyu LaHashem LaKohen davar shesofak. What does it mean that it shall be holy to the Kohen? The thing that at the end of this whole process will become sanctified to the Kohen, that's the thing that's required, right? Whether that's the bread or whether that's the sheep. But they're not connected together yet at that point. Okay, Hachinami. So here also we're talking about Davar Shesofa LaKohen. So therefore we're going to be not sure about the waving, right? We're not, just because the order of the pasuk says that they're waved already, we're just saying that ultimately at the end, some of these are going to be required, but not all of them. Okay, next. V'chi shchita, the Gemara wants to know, v'chi shchita also zika, what does Rabbi Yochanan say? Rabbi Yochanan says that once you do the slaughtering, the two are connected. Is that true? Or a mini? I have a contradiction. Ad shelo shchata nifras lachma. Let's say I don't do shchita yet, right? Person hasn't done the korban. This is talking about the korban toda. Okay, so he's doing korban toda. The bread is also connected to the korban toda. So he's got his loaves all set. Before he does shchita, the bread breaks. Now he's got a loaf that's broken. So what do?
You just find another loaf.
Yavi lachemacher, you got to find another loaf, exactly, who's been hanging around Menachos long enough to know, right? You got to bring another loaf, right? V'shochet, and then go ahead and do shchita, right? Misha shachta nifras lachma. However, once you've done shchita, now the bread is connected to the offering. If the bread breaks at that point, so hadam yizarek, you can throw the blood, v'habasar ye'achel, you can eat the animal, v'dei nidro lo yatza, but you have not fulfilled your obligation to bring your korban toda. V'halechem pasel, and the bread is pasel, because it was already broken. Now, nizra kadam, right, once you've thrown the blood, and then it breaks, so then, Torah min hashalim ala parus. So, what you need to do is you take one of the full ones, and that's the one you give to the Kohen.
Is that where we get the Lechem Mishnah from?
No, we get Lechem Mishnah from the Mun that was extra on Friday, right? This is an extra rule of we have to bring one out of the 10 loaves of bread and give it to the Kohen. Now, Ad Shelo Shchata, the Brisa continues, okay, about the bread of the Todah. So, if you haven't done shchita yet, yotzo lachma, let's say the bread leaves the azara, leaves the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, now it becomes invalid, leaves actually the walls of Yerushalayim, right? Machnisa, bring it back, and you're fine. I mean, you haven't done shchita yet, the bread is just bread. So if it left, bring it back. V'shochet, do shchita, and you're fine. Misha shachta, once you've done shchita, So now they're connected. Yotzo lachma, if the bread leaves the walls of Yerushalayim, so then you can continue doing the meat, right? Hadam yizarek, go ahead and throw the blood. Ve'habasar ye'achel, you can eat the korban. However, v'idei nidroi lo yotzo, since you didn't bring the bread, the korban's not valid as an offering, as fulfilling his vow. Ve'alechem pasol, the bread is invalid, right? Because it was yotzei. Nizra kadam, if the bread leaves Yerushalayim after the blood was already thrown, so then Torah mi masha bifnim al masha bechutz. Take one of the loaves of bread that are still valid and give that to the kohen, and that's accepted. Meaning you lose your part, so that's not a big deal. That's okay because there's no meila. It doesn't belong to the Beis Hamikdash anymore. After the blood is already thrown, it's your part. So just give a different one to the kohen. Now,
what's the machashava in this korban?
This is a korban toda.
Yeah. So they have to have. Obviously, the same.
They have to say thank. They're saying thank you, right?
But the same machashava for the meat and
It's all part of the same korban.
so they have to keep thinking that it's the same.
Well, once you do shechita, now they're joined, right? There's no additional thought necessary. You've already baked the bread. You bake the bread first,
Okay.
right? And at that point, the bread isn't connected. As soon as you do shechita, now the bread's connected. I'm not going to touch and do anything to the bread except give one to the kohen, right? All the rest is the animal offering at that point. So the Brisa says, okay, so now the Brisa is going to say one more thing about the Toda. Ad shelo shchata nitma lachma. Let's say before you do shchita, we know where this is going, right? Before shchita, the bread becomes tamei. Mevi lechma acher v'shochet, bring another loaf of bread. Do shchita, fine. Misha shachta, once you've done the shchita, nitma lachma, if the bread becomes tamei at that point, hadam yizarek, then go ahead and throw the blood, and then v'habasar ye'achel, you can eat the meat, v'idei nidro yatza, and at that point, even though the lechem is tamei, you're yotzei. Why? Because this is different. Tumah is different. Why? Shatzitz Maratza, this week's parsha, right? The tzitz is going to help you with tumah, so we'll get away with that one, right? Tzitz Maratza l'tamei. V'halechem possible, but the bread is possible. You can't eat that bread. Nizra kadam, if the blood has already been thrown, so then torem minatar al hatame. Then take a loaf of tahar bread and give that to the kohen. Okay, good. Now v'isaka daitach. Now let's get into the question. V'isaka daitach shchita osazika. If what Rabbi Yochanan said is correct, shchita links the bread to the animal. Kevan dehuzkiku zel lazeh b'shchita. Now that you've done shchita and the bread is linked, if solei lechem, we said that if the bread becomes pasol, so we said, go ahead and you can still eat the meat. Why? Ti pasol nami toda. If the bread is ruined, so the korban should also be ruined. They go together. No, shani toda. You're right. That's the case by the shtei alechem korban. That's not the case by a korban toda. Why? Terachmana karya shlamim. Because the korban toda is called a shlamim. And so therefore, since it's called a shlamim, ma shlamim craven below lechem, just like a shlamim can be brought without any bread at all, af toda crava below lechem. So to a korban toda can be brought without any bread. So loophole. Shlamim is not oil. Shlamim is korban oil is completely burnt. Korban shlamim is partially burnt, partially eaten by the kohanim, partially eaten by the owner. Right? So shlamim can be brought without bread. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Im timtza lomar tnufa osazika. Okay, we still were in doubt whether the waving is going to make this connection or not, right? Avad halechem, if that's the case, let's say you lose the bread after the waving. Avdu kivasim, so then the sheep are no good, right? Obviously, you lose one, you lose doing both, right? Avdu kivasim, if you lose the sheep, avad halechem. Now the bread's no good. If you lose the sheep, you lose the bread. Vim timta lomar tnufa enos azika. Now, on the other hand, if you hold that the halacha is that the waving does not connect the two, hevi lechem u kivasim vehunfu. If you bring the bread and the sheep and you wave them properly, ve'avad halechem, then you lose the bread. Vehevi lechem acher. Now you got to bring more bread. Right? Oso lechem to tenufa oena ton tenufa. Do you have to redo the waving? Right? In other words, or is the waving done? Right? Do you have to redo it? That's the question. Because if it's not connected, so now do I have to connect them? So do I have to do them again or not? Okay, what about, next question. We don't answer that one. Avdu kvasim, if you lose the sheep, loti boilach. I don't have a question, right? De vadai bai tnufa. For sure, I've got to wave the sheep again because the pasuk says, right? The pasuk says you're supposed to wave the sheep. Kiti boilach avad alechem. The question is if I lose the bread. Now the first bread was waved. So do I have to re-wave the second bread? I'm not even asking according to Ben Nanas. Obviously, according to Ben Nanas, Delmar Kavasi Mikar, he says the sheep is the most important part, and so therefore I don't even care if the bread gets lost, right? I can bring the sheep without the bread, right? So I don't even need the bread. So for sure, I don't need to wave the bread again. Kiti boilach aliba de Rabbi Akiva. The question is, according to Rabbi Akiva, damar lechem ikar. They say the bread is the most important part. So what's the rule here? Kevan de lechem ikar. Since the bread is the most important part, bai tnufa. Do you have to re-wave it? O dilma, or do we say kevan de matirin di de kvasim ninhu? Since the sheep were already permitted by the first waving of the bread, right? Lo tzarech tenufa. Now you don't have to wave the bread the second. The whole point of the waving is to be doing it together with the sheep, and it was already done. Now you don't need to do it anymore. So we don't have an answer to that question. All right, it's a good place for us to take a break. We will pick up Sunday morning remotely.